Anybody else that happens to be watching this online, we are having testimony today on Senate Bill 172. And for those online, you can go to kansaslegislature.org, look for the committees tab, select standing committees, then select Senate, then select utilities, and then select committee testimony. We have a number of conferees today. You click in the date box. Today's date will come up. You click on that, and you'll see the testimony, which is listed alphabetically and not in order of testimony. So what we're going to do today is have a hearing on 172. I'll start off with Matt Sterling and our revisor overview of Senate Bill 172. Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, committee. Senate Bill 172 would amend KSA 215818 and 216328 concerning crimes related to utility infrastructure. So under current law, tampering with a pipeline is a severity level 6 non-person felony. So the bill would strike this offense and replace it with several offenses related to critical infrastructure facilities. The bill would create the crimes of trespassing on a critical infrastructure facility as a Class A non-person misdemeanor, aggravated trespassing on a critical infrastructure facility as a severity level 7 non-person felony, criminal damage to a critical infrastructure facility as a severity level 6, and aggravated criminal damage to a critical infrastructure facility as a level 5 non-person felony. Additionally, the bill would require that any person who was arrested or convicted for a violation of any of these offenses could be held liable for any damages to personal or real property, and any person or entity that provided financial assistance or compensation to a person to commit an act described in the bill could also be held liable for any damages to personal or real property caused by that person. The changes you see in Section 2 of the bill are to conform the Kansas Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act to those new crimes concerning critical infrastructure facility. And then I've copied in my memo all the different facilities that are defined as a critical infrastructure facility, just kind of running through them real quickly so you have an idea. Petroleum refineries, various facilities generating electrical power, facilities for chemicals or rubber manufacturing, water facilities, a number of natural gas or oil facilities, facilities used for telecommunications or wireless technologies, ports and railways, steelmaking facilities, dams, and then any facilities that are identified by the Department of Homeland Security. And I'd be happy to try to answer any of the questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Sterling? Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the bill brief as well. So without the bill, are these kind of activities not defined as crimes, or is there something on statute that addresses these activities?
So I think, thank you, Senator, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. So currently, tampering with a pipeline under current law is the knowing and unauthorized alteration of or interference with any part of a pipeline. And the pipeline in that definition means any pipeline or related facility, building, etc., used in the transmission or transportation of natural gas, crude oil, petroleum, or anhydrous ammonia. So there's existing law concerning some activities for that tampering with a pipeline. The bill would kind of expand the field to apply to more facilities, and then would also create new crimes. So there'd be the trespassing, the aggravated trespassing, and then the damage, as opposed to tampering, the damage to a critical infrastructure facility, as well as the aggravated damage. So there are new crimes created with this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to our conferees, starting off with the oral proponents and Gavin Kreidler of American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. Gavin?
Hey, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, everyone hear me okay? First off, thank you for the opportunity to present in front of you today. It's hard to go after Matt Sterling because he basically gave my whole testimony. So thank you for a great explanation, and thank you for the committee's time today. I know it gets pretty valuable this close to turnaround, so we're grateful for the opportunity to present in front of you today. Like the chairman mentioned, my name is Gavin Kreidler, and I appear before you today representing the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association. We sought the introduction of Senate Bill 172 and want to discuss with you today about the two very simple but critically important things it does. The first thing Senate Bill 172 does is it creates a comprehensive and legal framework with regards to what entities in industry is considered a critical infrastructure facility, or I'll refer to it as CIF. The second thing this bill does is increase criminal penalties on individuals who might trespass, vandalize, or damage a CIF. Let's first talk about what a critical infrastructure facility is. As Matt mentioned, a critical infrastructure facility is a facility that is deemed critical to our everyday lifestyle. It is critical to the defense of our state and our country in some cases, and critical to our state and local economic output. These are facilities designated as such, critical infrastructure facilities, by the Department of Homeland Security. A few examples of these, as Matt mentioned: water treatment facilities, oil refineries, electrical generational facilities, rubber manufacturers, telecom infrastructures, dams, pipelines, railroad yards, among several others you'll find on the second page of our bill. So we want to talk about why we feel it's necessary to increase these criminal penalties. We certainly, just over the past few days, think about the importance of these CIFs in our everyday lifestyle. And frankly, they're keeping the heat on and keeping us safe and not freezing to death. And while that is important, we also realize CIFs represent a very sensitive target to criminal perpetrators who attempt to undermine and disrupt our state and our local economy. These are individuals who want to see sustained hardship to whether it be the CIF or the economics supported by that CIF. Now I want to talk a little bit about the criminal penalties portion of this bill. So as mentioned earlier, we took the penalty of normal trespassing, which is assigned a B misdemeanor, and we've increased that to an A misdemeanor. Senate Bill 172 then seeks to create the crime of aggravated, so with proven intent, trespassing, and we've assigned that a severity level 7 non-person felony. Mr. Chairman, I do want to talk specifically about these trespassing penalties and why we believe they're so important. I will speak only for my industry, but in the oil refinery business, it is a very complicated facility. We don't want you jumping the fence and taking a nighttime tour of an oil refinery. They're very complicated by their very being, and most are dangerous when you don't know what you're doing. We don't want anyone to get hurt on our property. Next thing you know, we would be lucky enough to probably be sued by that individual, and we certainly want to keep that out of the reality. Next, I'd like to talk about criminal damage. As Matt mentioned earlier, there's current Kansas statute already on the books regarding damaging a pipeline. If you were convicted of that crime, you'd be assigned a severity level 6 non-person felony. We felt that's wholly appropriate. We kept that penalty the same, and we did not increase that. What we did, obviously, is now we've created the comprehensive framework, and more entities now fit under that level 6. The next thing we did with regards to the penalties is we increased the penalty, for the crime of aggravated criminal damage. And that is assigned a severity level 5. And on the second page of my testimony, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I attached a copy of the Kansas sentencing grid for your reference. If you're not familiar, I want to talk specifically about a severity level 5. There is not a lot of room for probation on a level 5. And that is critically important. Again, I'd bet $1 to a donut there's not a single citizen across the state of Kansas or one of your normal constituents who's going to commit that crime. That is reserved for that individual who, God forbid, over the past few days wants to put a pipe bomb in an electrical generational facility, wants to knock out a pipeline. Currently, a lot of those criminal damages outside of the pipeline would be assigned a severity level 7 non-person felony. We don't think that's near stiff enough. If you notice the penalties under severity level 7, most of that is presumptive probation outside of having several felonies. So if you try and attack the electrical grid, particularly in the situation that we're in, and you get a severity level 7, we do not feel that's appropriate penalty. The last thing this bill does with regards to the criminal penalty is it holds recruiters of this type of criminal activity financially liable for damage. We feel that's critically important. If you're going to recruit a buddy to go knock out a control tower at a water treatment facility, you're going to pay him. Just because you didn't swing the hammer doesn't mean you shouldn't be held liable. Mr. Chairman, as I begin to wrap up, I have certainly spoke a lot about Kansas industry, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the thousands of Kansas employees who I'm frankly not envious of their job today, working that pipeline, keeping that electrical grid safe. They shouldn't have to worry about this sort of criminal activity in their job. Those industries are certainly dangerous enough, and they shouldn't have to worry about criminal mischief. I want to leave you in the committee with one very recent incident. Just a day or two after the Super Bowl in a small little town outside of Tampa called Oldsmar, Florida, a water treatment facility that serves the town of a population of 15,000 was hacked. The hacker tried to dramatically increase the amount of lye that was produced in that water to poisonous levels. If not for the quick thinking of an engineer who shut that facility down and caught that in time, by 9 a.m. the next morning, the citizens of Oldsmar, Florida would have been drinking poisonous water. The Wall Street Journal had a really good write-up on Saturday about this, and I'd like to leave you with this quote. This incident comes as officials warn about the growing sophistication and brazenness of attacks on critical infrastructure. Many attacks are never publicly revealed, but the Wall Street Journal identified targets in a Russian campaign to pierce electric utility defenses by first penetrating trusted suppliers, and another effort in 2019 by unidentified hackers who targeted electric utilities in at least 18 states. Mr. Chairman, that very next day, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida issued a press release encouraging law enforcement to treat this as a matter of national security, and we would certainly agree. Mr. Chairman, with that, I will stand down. We'll stand for questions at the appropriate time as well.
Thank you very much, Gavin. We'll hold our questions till all the oral proponents have had a chance to speak. Next up, Jason Watkins, Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason Watkins, Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. Going to say something I've never said in a hearing before. I cannot do a better job than Mr. Kreidler just did.
He said that about other people, though. He just didn't say it about him.
So with that in mind, I will be very, very quick with my testimony. Gavin did an excellent job covering what the bill does and the reason for it. We actually heard a lot from our membership about this bill. We appear in hearings all the time on different pieces of legislation, and most of the time that's because it goes through a committee process at the chamber. This was one where a lot of our members that either own and operate this type of infrastructure or rely upon this infrastructure reached out to us and said, this is important. It is not a solution or a well, how do you say that? Problem for a solution? Yeah, thanks. Something like that. So we wanted to be on the record in support of this, and we would urge the committee to pass it. So thank you. Happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Kent Eckles from the American Petroleum Institute. Kent?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I am Kent Eckles here on behalf of API. It's the American Petroleum Institute. For those of you who aren't aware, API is a 625-member trade group out of D.C., and they are the only trade group that represents the entire facet of the oil and gas industry. So exploration, pipelines, refining, and then marketing on the downstream side. Thanks for allowing us to be here in support of 172 today. I'd say that API's safety in their communities, their workers, the environment is their #1 priority. API has a goal of 0 incidents. And the reason that we need this bill is because that jeopardizes, without tough language, it jeopardizes our ability to achieve that goal of 0 incidents. There's been a recent FBI report, I'm trying to keep this in front of my face, FBI report that showed that there's been an increase in environmental attacks, environmental extremist attacks on our industry since 2016. It's usually they're surrounded or they're around contentious infrastructure projects, so pipelines up in the north central United States, that kind of thing. We've seen them in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Canada. The most recent one that I found, smaller in scale but still serious, was in Aspen, Colorado, December 28th. So just 6 weeks ago, a group got into a natural gas pipeline, turned it off to the entire city of Aspen, Colorado, and spray painted their logo on the pipes. FBI is investigating that right now, trying to figure out who it is. So we're all in favor of free speech, the right to peacefully protest and do all that, but we think Kansas could use tougher language for some of these, as Gavin rightfully pointed out. And then finally, similar legislation to this has passed in our region. I just kind of wanted to throw that out to you. Iowa passed this in 2018, Indiana in 19, Missouri in 2019, and Wisconsin also in 2019. So it could happen in the Midwest, and we think this is a good bill. So I'll take questions whenever it's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Darcy Meese from Water One. Is Darcy online? She's WebEx.
I am. Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We sure can, Darcy.
Great. My name is Darcy Meese. I'm with Water One. We are the public water supplier in Johnson County, Kansas. So we serve about 455,000 customers in Johnson County with a 272 square mile service territory. And we are here today in support of Senate Bill 172. We think this is another enhancement to the security protocols that we already take with regards to water, and for many of the same reasons that you've already heard as to why this is an important bill, it is equally as important to water facilities. Again, a little bit about Water One. We have about 2,700 miles of pipeline within that 272 square mile territory. So that's about enough pipeline to go from New York to Los Angeles. In addition to just the pipeline and the appurtenances there too, we have water intakes, elevated storage tanks, underground reservoirs, pump stations. I won't go on through the list because it's in my testimony. But essentially all of that is spread out kind of across our 272 mile square territory. And we have an obligation to protect all of that. In terms of cybersecurity, we have a sophisticated SCADA system similar to what they had in Oldsmar, Florida, but we certainly had some precautions in place that would prevent what happened down there to happen in Johnson County. Also, in terms of security, Water One, you probably heard a little bit, I think it was mentioned in a Wall Street Journal article about the 2018 America's Water Infrastructure Act. That required water supply facilities to go out and do kind of a broad-based vulnerability assessment across their systems, including their source water. So Water One gets the water from the Missouri River and the Kansas River. We did complete that earlier this year, or actually earlier in 2020, in compliance with the law. And we feel like, based upon just the types of things that we looked at and the updates that we made to our emergency response plan, that Senate Bill 172 is going to be another additional tool that we can layer on top of all that work we did in 2020 in response to the federal law. The one item that I would point out with regards to how water facilities are described in the bill in section H4, right now, in terms of water supply facilities, the language says water intake structure or water treatment facility. And we have spoken with the sponsor of this bill, also the revisor and the chairman, about possibly expanding on that definition a bit in terms of water supply facilities. And I believe there may be a balloon amendment that is discussed at some point, but essentially what we would like to see that defined as water supply, diversion, production, treatment, storage, and distribution facilities and appurtenances, including but not limited to underground pipelines. So that's very similar to some of the other definitions that you see within the bill already. And as such, we respectfully request Senate Bill 172 be passed by the committee as amended, and I'll be happy to take any questions if you have some.
Darcy, want to call attention to the committee. We also have some conferees providing written testimony in favor of the bill. Randy Stuckey of Renew Kansas Biofuels, Tom Pallas of the Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience, and Kimberly Sfati, joint testimony with a number of entities there. So I'm going to open it up to questions from the committee for any of our proponents of the bill. Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question about, is it covered elsewhere, cyber attacks? So I just did not know.
Senator Corson, that's a great question. This bill does cover it. If the committee wanted to add belt and suspender language to ensure that, I think that would be fine. But we vetted that heavily, spoke to the revisor ahead of time, and yes, it covers it.
Okay, and that's in like the knowingly entering or remaining in would cover a cyber intrusion?
Correct. Damage is damage, whether it's cyber or physical.
Gotcha. Glad to know that. Thank you.
Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to the neutral testimony. We have oral neutral testimony from Leo Hanos. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correct. Chief Engineer of KCC Utilities Division. Leo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity to appear before you. First of all, I'd say that the KCC certainly is supportive of the idea of providing extra security precautions for these facilities. Many of these are regulated in some way by the KCC, whether it's oil tanks on a production lease or substations and that type of thing. The reason that I wanted to talk to you today is really when I read the language, it wasn't clear to me, and so I recommended to our team that I provide testimony. And what caught my eye was the first sentence, which struck the language that tampering with a pipeline is annoying in an unauthorized way as interference with any part of a pipeline is considered as damage to a facility that would be covered. So I tried to reconcile that, and I went back into H, which lists all the various parts. And maybe I'm just too far in the weeds, so I'll give you that. But as I'm looking through it, I see H14, which clearly covers our distribution gas system completely. You know, all the piping, city gates, et cetera. So I'm looking for, okay, where does our gas transmission system be covered? And I get into 16, and it says below or above ground pipelines, oil, gas, there it is for transmission, or any other storage facilities. Then I have a sentence there that starts out as a clause, says that is enclosed by a fence. And it made me question, it's probably just language, maybe it's just ambiguous, but it made me question whether it could be interpreted that the facilities that are covered by this are only those that are above ground, that are enclosed by a fence, instead of all the facilities. And that's my main point, but there is one other one which may sound rhetorical, but when is a pipeline a pipeline? Pipelines, by definition in federal pipeline safety code, for example, are related to pipelines that are transporting product that affects commerce. So basically they are pipelines that are active. You see a lot of trespass and crimes being conducted on pipelines before they become in service, while they're being constructed. Now, maybe this covers that, but again, thinking belt and suspenders, it may be helpful to try to somehow make sure that it's clear that this bill would cover any pipeline while it's under construction as well. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, sir. Let me ask Mr. Revisor, Matt, if about that section, it'd be on page 3, starting at line 29 through 33, about enclosed by a fence, if that's something we may want to consider for a balloon amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the way that I read that provision, you have a list of things. You have a portion of any below ground or above ground oil, gas, hazardous liquid, or chemical pipeline, tank, railroad facility, or any other storage facility that's enclosed by the fence. So I read that modification of that is enclosed by a fence or other physical barrier is applying to any other storage facility. But I take Mr. Hanos's point that we could think about trying to clarify that additionally. I'll give it some thought and see if I have some suggestions for the committee.
And maybe also consider the under construction, the pipeline stuff under construction.
Yeah, that one I think is more clearly ambiguous, so we can consider something for that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hanos. Appreciate that. Brian Cox is our next neutral testimony from Kansas Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys.
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to testify. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you, Brian.
Thank you. Chairman, the large concern that we have with this proposed legislation comes in subsection F, of the new statute or the amended statute to define the new crimes. That section specifically reads that somebody who is arrested can be held liable. The concerns with that are that people can be arrested all the time. It doesn't mean that they are guilty of any particular offense. Currently, in Kansas law, anytime somebody is convicted of an offense, the judge that sentences them is obligated to order restitution. The provisions of this subsection F essentially replicate all of those provisions that have the proper procedural protections and have quite significant case law built up around them about how that is done, when it is done, etc. Further, this section would impose that liability separately on anybody that remunerated or solicited that person to commit that destruction of property. That can also be addressed by prosecuting whoever is alleged to have done that with the crime of solicitation, which would be an inchoate offense, automatically attaches to this, just as it does every other crime in Kansas. And so we are requesting or suggesting to the committee that removal of subsection F would promote the protection of due process rights, that the things that subsection are intended to protect are already there in the Kansas Criminal Code, and that these additions aren't necessary, and in fact, they really would cause some problems with due process rights.
Okay, committee, any questions on that? Yeah. Senator Olson?
Not on that. I just wanted to make sure the reviser has the Water One Amendment drafted, so when we're working the bill.
Mr. Sterling, I think we have the Water One Amendment ready. I believe we do.
We do, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so when we work the bill, we'll have the Water One Amendment ready. Senator Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a question, just some conferees have referred to the bill as amended, and it hasn't been amended yet. So we have it as it's introduced, and I hear there are amendments coming. One of them that Mr. Cox just mentioned is the proposal then on page 2, section F of section 1. Section 1, subsection F1 is the proposal by the conferee to strike all of section 1, F1.
Mr. Cox?
Yes, Senator, the proposal would actually be to strike the entire subsection F. I believe F2 discusses particular things that somebody who commits these offenses would be liable for. Looking at those, I believe that all of those are covered by current restitution law. The ambit of what can be ordered as restitution is quite broad, and I believe would cover all of those things. So the entire subsection F, I think, is duplicative of already existing criminal law.
Thanks for clarifying what your intention was. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cox, what would you think if we changed the arrested in line 12 to convicted? Any person who is convicted, would that seem to take care of some of your concerns?
I think that would be a good first step. I think there are still concerns with the language later on in that subsection F1 about people that have remunerated individuals to do this. I think they still need due process rights. But overall, again, all of this is being taken care of. In my written testimony, I've cited the specific sections of the sentencing rules, sentencing laws that lay out how restitution is to be ordered. And I think that all of this, even with that change, it would just be doing the same thing over again, which would create needless complexity in the statutes as far as having to look in different places and then having to litigate issues of, well, if this one's a little bit different, which law controls, so on and so forth. I really think this is already covered by the current rules that judges must order restitution.
Matt, Sterling, Or do we think we need to work on this with Mr. Cox for a potential balloon amendment?
Well, Mr. Chairman, that'd be up to the committee. I mean, I haven't spent any time researching the issue Mr. Cox raises, so I don't know if I can add much to the statements he's made. But happy to work with anyone the committee wishes me to draft any proposed amendments.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Cox. Senator Olson.
So, when do you plan on working this bill?
Not today.
Okay, good.
Not today.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, we've got some amendments coming from Water One, potentially from some other folks, and want to make sure we get the language right and address all the concerns on that. So certainly not today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and we might work to try to make sure that we're not redundant in that section and get that fixed too. See, any other questions, committee? Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a question for, I guess, Mr. Cox and the reviser. Again, in section 1F1, if we're talking about lines 14 through 17, any person or entity that provides consideration or remuneration may also be held liable. I guess for the reviser, what would that mean? Would that mean civilly liable, criminally liable? I guess this is in the criminal code, so is that, if the language were left as is that what the consequence would be? I guess it's defining a crime that you may be held liable, and I'm just, I don't know if that's, if we have any due process issues with that, because it's in the same paragraph if you're arrested or convicted, so I think we need to look at that a little better, a little more carefully.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess expanding on what, you're right, this is a criminal statute. Subsection F, at least that first sentence, does pertain to liability for damages, so civilly. I would say that second sentence is less clear. I mean, it talks about being held liable for damages, so I would assume that's also civil liability. But I could entertain an argument that in some way pertains to criminal liability. So that also could be something we could look at either clarifying or changing in some manner.
And if I may as well.
Without, don't want to substantially change the intent of the bill by doing that. We want to make sure that we've got this clarified, though, so it's clear, so we don't have any due process issues. Mr. Cox, would you mind working with Mr. Sterling on this to make sure we've got that section clear?
Absolutely, Chairman. And if I might just add to the answer on the previous question, there are crimes of solicitation and conspiracy that attach to any offense in the Kansas Criminal Code. And so if you have somebody that is providing remuneration or is getting somebody to commit an offense like this, they're either going to be guilty of or be able to be convicted of one of those, or be convicted as an accomplice to the offense, in which case the same restitution provisions would apply to them as well. So as far as a remedy being there, both for financial liability as in the criminal case, I think that would be there even if this language were removed. I am very happy to work with Mr. Sterling. I will get his contact information. The one thing I would say is that the area that I'm a little bit unclear on is if there's something particular in F2 that the proponents of the bill don't think is covered by already existing remedies, and if they can provide input to Mr. Sterling or myself, I'd be happy to work with Mr. Sterling to ensure that that's, if it's not already in the restitution, that it's considered for the bill.
I think Mr. Kreitler indicated he would work with Matt as well and Mr. Cox to try to make sure all concerns are cleared up on this before we work the bill. Sounds good. Senator Olson, do you have one?
Just curious how this is going to be brought. I mean, each one will probably be a different balloon, so it'd be kind of an up and down vote. I'm guessing, is that how you were planning on doing it?
I'm guessing that's probably right. I think we've got several, we'll probably have, including this, probably 3 amendments that I see coming. One from Water One, one from another entity, and then this one. And so we can debate those. And
I just want to know a little more about the last one to make sure I know what it does. Okay.
I agree 100%. Yeah, so when we get into the legal weeds, we may have to pull Senator Warren in here to make sure that we've got this all correct. And of course, Mr. Sterling will work with them, but I don't want to change the intent of the bill, but I want to make sure that we've got it clear so we don't run into any legal issues either. So, thank you, Senator Olson. Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll move on to our oral opponent testimony, and first is Rabbi Reber from Kansas Interfaith Action. Rabbi's on WebEx. Rabbi?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Rabbi Moti Reber. I'm the executive director of Kansas Interfaith Action. We're a statewide faith-based advocacy group that works on a variety of racial, economic, and climate justice issues, and I'm here in opposition to SB 172. So there are already many laws on the books against sabotage and property damage. The idea that someone could put a pipe bomb into a refinery and have that not already be illegal is not sensible. Critical infrastructure is built and used in Kansas every day. And as far as I know, there has not even been organized opposition to one, let alone protests or attempted sabotage. So the question becomes, what problem is this bill intended to address? And the answer is, it's a solution without a problem. This is a purely political bill, an attempt to outlaw political speech brought by national fossil fuel interests and partisan ideological organizations. The underlying context of this law is climate change, the crisis of human-caused climate disruption. It's well established that we need to get off fossil fuels half by 2030, completely by 2050, in order to keep warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius, the international recognized target. Yet we do not address this problem with the seriousness that it requires. There's no conversation about it in the Capitol. There's no policy. There's no way to make policy in Kansas. There's never any hearings about it. The only committees that even talk about it are commodity committees like Ag and Utilities. And we spend much more time on bills like this than on seriously addressing the challenge. In the absence of policy, in the absence of action, sometimes people take it upon themselves to bring symbolic actions in opposition to increases in fossil fuel infrastructure. These are in the tradition of nonviolent civil disobedience, in the tradition of Dr. King, and more recently, the Poor People's Campaign. These are nonviolent actions taken by people to witness to the seriousness of the crisis of climate disruption. And the fact that trespassing and aggravated trespassing are included in this bill are specifically included in order to prevent nonviolent civil disobedience actions and to criminalize them. These penalties, people take these actions knowing that they're illegal and prepared to take the consequences, but these consequences should reflect the seriousness of the motivations and the commitment to nonviolence and should not be felonized as they are in this bill. In addition, the RICO statute inclusion of people who are purported to pay for the action could endanger nonprofit organizations and even congregations, churches. Someone who paid for a bus to go to a pipeline to do a sit down, a protected speech, would then be considered liable under RICO statutes, and that is criminalization of speech and criminalization of anti-climate activity. This is not a Kansas solution. This is coming from elsewhere. This is a cookie cutter bill that's been put forward in 14 other states, or that's been passed in 14 other states. It's a way for the fossil fuel industry to lock in new infrastructure for decades to come, way past the time when we need to be winding it down. By criminalizing speech and witness, They wanted to build a defense against the political mood shifting further, against climate policy itself. In conclusion, this is a cookie cutter template law from outside of Kansas. It attempts to criminalize political speech and to lock in fossil fuel infrastructure. It addresses a problem that doesn't exist and doesn't address a problem that does exist, to wit, human-caused climate disruption. That's an issue that we should be dealing with in committees like this one. This bill is unnecessary, anti-democratic, and anti-climate, and we urge you to vote it down. Thank you very much. I'll take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Rabbi. We have two other oral opponents to testify, then we'll open the question. Next up is Jack Pastor of Sierra Club. Zach?
Yeah, can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes, we can.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee, and for the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 172. And isn't it timely that we get to talk about critical energy infrastructure? I want to be clear that as one of the oldest and largest grassroots organizations dedicated to protecting the environment, we're an environmental group that, if there's a law that we hope to change, we bring it to you to lobby the legislature, or we go to court. We do not support breaking the law. In fact, in our mission, we have to use all lawful means to carry out our objectives to help the natural and human environment. So we just want to make clear that we not advocate for lawlessness or committing crimes in pursuit of environmental protection. And really the reason we're oppositional to Senate Bill 172 is similar to the notion expressed by the rabbi before me, but that we haven't seen any of issues with our laws, with the crimes going unpunished as it deals with energy infrastructure in Kansas. You heard some examples. To our awareness, you didn't hear any examples in Kansas. There is no necessary need for increased laws when we have existing laws that protect public and private property from trespassing and criminal damages in Kansas. I would say that our laws on the books as it is are just fine. They're doing their job, and so there's no need for this law. And especially because this law expanding trespassing and aggravated trespassing could have adverse unintended consequences for accidental infractions or for legal free speech. And that's kind of what I want to draw to your attention. There's already been a number of questions to this bill already, but for accidental infractions, to the extent that they may be charged a felony level crime for a simple accident. There's part of the bill that says impede or inhibit operations of the facility. There's the example of, if your cows get loose on the road and impedes the operations for the workers to get to the plant, is that a felony crime? So we just got to really think about what we're trying to do with this bill and if it's really necessary in today's time. So those are our comments. Thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.
Back, final oral opponent is Kent Rowe, and he's on WebEx. Kent?
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm here in opposition to Senate Bill 172 based on experience. I too was a member of the National Petroleum Refiners Institute, Fire and Accident Safety Group of the American Petroleum Institute. I saw accidents. I had co-workers burned to death as an operating engineer. This is, of course, not an act of intent, but is it? Is the system itself faulty? The system that you put in place in refining and transmission of dangerous products. And then I inspected the pipelines as well, from Tulsa to Enid, Oklahoma, the ammonia pipeline. Accidents happened there. People were dismembered, workers. Though I see nothing in this that covers the rights of workers that may make an honest mistake in a tough position. These pipelines have faulty welds, and people who discover that or who have been in contact with information do have a right to protest, demonstrate symbolically the construction of dangerous known for environmental poisoning. And what about the Water One? Come on, Water One is trying to be protected by the Anishinaabe indigenous groups up in Minnesota, Line 3, and the Dakota Access Pipeline. Don't they have a right to get out there, and at least symbolically? And you can see in my testimony, who would this go after? A line of indigenous people standing, holding sweetgrass, a choir of Quakers with a piano singing at a fuel dock, and an 80-year-old woman standing in her front yard. And I'll bring this back home to me. In 1979, I was on the railroad tracks at Burlington, Kansas, bringing in the first nuclear reactor, the GE Mark II, to Wolf Creek. And symbolically, that was I was arrested, given a fine, and let go. Well, that was January 12th, 1979. What happened March 28th, 1979, just 2.5 months later? Does anybody recall? 3 Mile Island occurred. So what is going on here with this authoritarian bill? This is not something that we should be doing. We should be looking at something that's safe, and it has good work practices, good environmental practices. And finally, I have a question. What about the power lines, these power towers of 130 kVA lines that were constructed in the Wichita 67214 area? People who, it was right in their front yards. You can see this today. And we've measured these radiation from these lines. And according to World Health Organization, these lines are dangerous. Wouldn't these people, these homeowners, have a right to blockade that? Or would you charge them as you would me? I might still be in prison instead of being a evaluator of papers in the 51st North American Power Symposium that's going to bring electrification to Kansas, not just a power supply, smart grid, and so forth. So thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. And we also have written opponent testimony, none. Committee, do we have any questions for any of the opponents? Seeing none, I think what we'll do is we'll continue to work on the amendments, and we'll probably hear this bill at some point. I'm not sure when, but once we get everything worked out with everyone. So thank you all for being here today. With that, I believe we are adjourned.